Roll never truly left us? Or is it possible that everything we've been told about his death in 1977 was part of a carefully orchestrated grand scam? Buckle up, because what we're about to reveal will leave you questioning everything. We've uncovered new evidence that just might prove the rumors. Elvis Presley may have faked his own death. On August 16, 1977, the world lost an icon. But did we? That's the question we've all been asking for decades. What if Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, didn't actually die that fateful day? What if he faked his death, disappearing into the shadows and leaving behind only the mystery of his supposed passing? We've all heard the story. Elvis Presley, age 42, found unresponsive in his Graceland mansion, declared dead of heart failure. The nation mourned the loss of an icon who had redefined music and entertainment. But, buried under the grief, the rumors began almost immediately. Was it all a carefully planned escape? Was Elvis tired of the pressures of fame, the constant paparazzi, the overwhelming expectations? What if, just maybe, he had orchestrated his death, faked it, and lived on in secret? It sounds unbelievable, right? After all, how could one of the most famous figures in history just vanish without anyone noticing? But what if Elvis was never really gone? What if his death was just a smokescreen? Over the years, countless conspiracy theories have surfaced, all claiming that Elvis Presley may have never truly left us. Some of these theories are based on nothing more than wishful thinking and blurry sightings, but others are backed by strange occurrences and yes, even new evidence that continues to trickle in. Now, let's set the stage. Elvis Presley was no stranger to the spotlight. Born in Tupelo, Mississippi, he went on to become a global superstar, creating legendary music, starring in films, and becoming a cultural phenomenon. But with that level of fame came an enormous pressure. Elvis was constantly in the public eye, dealing with the toll it took on his mental health, his family, and his personal life. What if, after years of grueling stardom, Elvis simply decided enough was enough? By the time of his death, Elvis was known to be struggling with his health, battling weight gain, prescription drug use, and increasing isolation. The public's image of the king was beginning to fade. Was Elvis looking for a way out? Could he have planned his disappearance years in advance, carefully staging his own death and setting up a life in the shadows? What if everything from the way he lived to the way he died was all part of a grand scam? An escape from the world? A final act that no one could have predicted? Now let's dig into the rumor. The moment Elvis was declared dead, the whispers started. Fans didn't want to believe it. The king had always been larger than life, immortal even. And so people began reporting strange, unexplainable sightings of Elvis after 1977. Some were so sure they saw him that they couldn't be convinced otherwise. Could it be that Elvis was still out there, alive and well? In the weeks, months, and years that followed, multiple fans from all over the world claimed they had seen Elvis. One fan swears she saw him in the Bahamas in the early 80s. She described a man with the same iconic hairstyle and facial features, wearing sunglasses, who looked strikingly like Elvis. Another report came from a security guard at Graceland who claimed to have seen a man matching Elvis's description walking around the property late at night without anyone noticing. How could this be? Could these sightings just be coincidental lookalikes, or was there more to the story? Let's consider the timeline. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive at his home in Graceland, and the official cause of death was reported as heart failure, likely due to the years of substance abuse. But wait, there were discrepancies from the start. The people closest to Elvis, including his close friends and doctors, began to raise questions. Some of them later came forward and claimed that Elvis wasn't truly dead at all. One story comes from a nurse who worked in the Memphis hospital at the time, who recalled seeing an unconscious Elvis on a stretcher, but something didn't feel right. A friend of Elvis, someone who was with him in the months leading up to his death, later came forward and revealed strange details. According to this confidant, Elvis had discussed the idea of leaving everything behind. He even talked about the possibility of disappearing and starting over somewhere far away from the fame and chaos of his life. Could this person have been hinting at something much deeper? Was Elvis planning to vanish, and did he execute it perfectly? At first, these reports were brushed off as conspiracy theories, but the sightings continued to surface. Over the years, more and more individuals came forward, each with their own story of seeing Elvis alive. A random traveler in the mid-1980s swears she saw a man in a hotel lobby in Las Vegas who looked exactly like the king. Same features, same eyes, same signature style. And then there was the bizarre case of a supposed Elvis look-alike spotted in the parking lot of a Nashville supermarket. Could this man with the same unmistakable features actually have been Elvis? Fans began to wonder, could it be true? Could Elvis have faked his death and was still living among us? These sightings weren't limited to the US. In fact, Elvis's fans around the world began reporting similar stories. In the early 1990s, a man who resembled Elvis was seen in the Bahamas, relaxing on the beach, never speaking to anyone. He was tall, with the same unmistakable build and facial structure as the king. Is it possible that Elvis, weary of the fame and the constant pressure of the spotlight, chose to live a peaceful life in an exotic location, away from prying eyes and the demands of being the king of rock and roll? Is it possible that he faked his death for the ultimate escape? As the rumors continued to spread, new evidence began to surface that seemed to suggest that Elvis Presley may not have died in 1977 at all. It wasn't just blurry sightings or hearsay anymore. There were tangible pieces of evidence that could potentially back up these theories. Among the most compelling were DNA tests and photographs that, when scrutinized, raised more questions than they answered. One of the most controversial pieces of evidence came from a DNA specialist who was called upon to investigate whether Elvis could have faked his death and lived on under another identity. According to reports, the DNA from the body that was found in Graceland didn't match what was expected from Elvis Presley's own DNA. The story goes that family members had provided DNA samples for a match after the autopsy, but when the results were reviewed, some noticed discrepancies. The blood samples taken from the body were, reportedly, not consistent with Elvis's biological family, leading some to question whether the person in that casket was really the king of rock and roll at all. The DNA mismatch, although not conclusive proof, was certainly a strong argument for those who believed the man who died in Graceland wasn't Elvis at all. Adding to the mystery were photographs. Many Elvis fans and conspiracy theorists point to a photograph that surfaced in the early 1980s, taken in a small town in Tennessee, showing a man who looked strikingly similar to Elvis Presley. The man in the photo was dressed in plain clothes, far from the glitz and glamour of his public persona, yet the resemblance was undeniable. The image showed a man with the same facial features, including the iconic jawline, the same hairstyle, and even the same intense, charismatic eyes. It appeared to be Elvis, except the photo was reportedly taken well after his supposed death in 1977. In addition to the photograph, there were other instances where people claimed to have seen a man who appeared to be Elvis, even in everyday settings like grocery stores or at airports. There were those who swore they saw him in a small diner in the Midwest, a man with the unmistakable features of the king, casually reading a newspaper. Could these sightings be nothing more than wishful thinking? Or were these legitimate encounters with someone who was not only alive, but living a quiet life away from the spotlight? The growing body of evidence, including this mysterious photograph and the questionable DNA analysis, led many to ask the question, what if Elvis really had faked his death? Could he have orchestrated his disappearance with such precision that no one could ever uncover the truth? For those who believed in the conspiracy, these pieces of evidence provided more fuel for the fire, suggesting that the king had found a way to escape his fame and the crushing pressures of stardom. Of course, while these pieces of evidence were compelling to some, there was also a significant amount of skepticism surrounding the theories about Elvis's survival. After all, this was an icon whose death had been announced to the entire world. For many, the idea that the king of rock and roll could fake his own death seemed almost too fantastical to be true. Could someone as famous as Elvis Presley really slip away unnoticed? One of the most persistent arguments from skeptics is the lack of definitive, irrefutable proof. Sure, there were photographs and sightings, but none of these pieces of evidence were conclusive. No one ever produced a concrete, verified photograph of Elvis after his alleged death, at least not one that could be definitively proven to be him. And while the DNA mismatch was an intriguing claim, it was not enough to say with certainty that the body in Graceland wasn't Elvis. After all, the body could have been that of a close relative, or the mismatched DNA could have been the result of a clerical error or contamination. Skeptics pointed out that the scientific community had not fully verified these claims, and without the hard evidence, the conspiracy theories remained speculative. Another point of contention for those who doubted the theory was the sheer scale of such a deception. Elvis was one of the most famous people in the world, and pulling off a fake death would require an immense amount of planning and resources. Would Elvis, in the face of constant media attention, be able to escape escape without being noticed by someone, somewhere. The argument for a hidden Elvis suggests that not only did he disappear in plain sight, but he also managed to convince countless people, family, friends, medical professionals, that he had died, all while maintaining his privacy in a world that was increasingly obsessed with celebrity. Additionally, many pointed out that there had been no verified sightings of Elvis after his death that were beyond reasonable doubt. Sure, people claim to have seen him, but what about the hundreds of other celebrity lookalikes or impersonators? With Elvis's iconic appearance, it was hardly surprising that others, particularly in the age of impersonators, might have resembled him enough to convince fans they were seeing the real thing. Just as people claim to have seen Elvis in Las Vegas, there are also accounts of individuals being mistaken for other famous figures. Perhaps these sightings were not of a man trying to escape the spotlight, but rather an overactive imagination, fueled by the longing for the king to return. Finally, skeptics often refer to the psychological phenomenon of celebrity worship, where fans are so invested in the lives of their idols that they can begin to see them everywhere. The idea of Elvis still being alive is an appealing fantasy to many people. After all, who wouldn't want the king to still be among us? But could it be that the sightings and photographs were nothing more than wishful thinking, or simply coincidences? Despite all of this, the mystery of Elvis Presley's death continues to linger. While some firmly believe he orchestrated his disappearance, others remain firmly rooted in the belief that Elvis died in 1977 and the sightings and photographs are nothing more than an elaborate web of rumors and misidentifications. It's a debate that remains unresolved, one that challenges the very notion of truth and reality. What if the truth lies somewhere in between? What if the legend of Elvis Presley will remain a mystery, one that fans will continue to chase for generations to come? For many Elvis fans, the idea that the king may still be alive isn't just a wild conspiracy, it's a beacon of hope. Elvis's music and legacy have inspired millions, and the thought that he could still be out there quietly living a life free from the pressures of fame is a tantalizing notion. For these fans, the belief that Elvis never really left is not just about wishful thinking, it's about preserving the magic of an era and the larger-than-life persona that Elvis embodied. From the moment of his death, fans around the world refused to accept that their hero was gone. They couldn't fathom that someone as vibrant, as full of life, could be taken from them so suddenly. The rumors began immediately, with reports of sightings from fans claiming to have spotted Elvis in places as varied as airports, shopping malls, and even small towns across the United States. These reports were often brushed off by authorities and the media, but to the fans who believed, they were more than just coincidences. They were signs that their king was still with them. One of the most famous sightings that fueled the rumors came from a woman who claimed to have seen Elvis at an airport in the early 1980s. She said she recognized him instantly. The same facial features, the same blue eyes, the same unmistakable charisma. The woman was adamant that it was Elvis, though he was dressed in plain clothes, wearing sunglasses, and trying to blend in with the crowd. She even described how he smiled at her briefly before disappearing into the crowd, leaving her with the feeling that she had just seen a ghost, or perhaps the living king. Other fans reported seeing someone who looked like Elvis in places such as Las Vegas, where impersonators and lookalikes were common. But these weren't impersonators. They were fans who had witnessed a man they were convinced was the real Elvis Presley. Theories ranged from Elvis living under a new identity in a remote part of the world to him simply hiding in plain sight, avoiding the public eye, and refusing to acknowledge his fans' desperate hopes for his return. For some, these sightings were proof enough that Elvis had faked his death. The emotional connection between Elvis and his fans is undeniable. He wasn't just a musician, he was a cultural symbol. To many, the idea that he could walk away from his fame and live a quiet life was a comforting thought. It meant that the king didn't die tragically young, but rather chose to escape the suffocating pressures of superstardom. Fans refused to believe the official narrative and embraced the possibility that their hero was still out there, living his life on his own terms. This connection to Elvis's fans is something that transcends mere fandom. It's a deep emotional bond. For many, Elvis represented something more than just music. He represented freedom, rebellion, and the power to change the world. The idea that he could be hiding in plain sight was a comforting thought, a way to hold on to that piece of the past that had been taken too soon. It allowed fans to continue living in the world that Elvis had created, where his music, his style, and his influence still reigned supreme. For the die-hard Elvis faithful, these sightings weren't just coincidences. They were the keys to a bigger mystery, one that would continue to haunt them for decades to come. Even though time has passed, the belief in Elvis's survival continues to thrive in the hearts of his most devoted fans, who still hold on to the hope that one day, the king will step forward and reveal that he never truly left them. Despite the growing number of sightings, photographs, and other pieces of circumstantial evidence, there remains a significant amount of skepticism surrounding the theory that Elvis Presley faked his death and is still alive. Skeptics argue that there is simply no hard, irrefutable evidence to support the idea, and that much of what's been presented is either misidentification or wishful thinking. In the age of celebrity lookalikes, impersonators, and internet rumors, it's easy for fans to be swept up in a web of speculation without ever questioning the validity of what they see. First and foremost, the skeptics point out that no one has ever produced a solid, verifiable sighting of Elvis after 1977. Sure, there have been numerous reports of people who believe they've seen him, but there is no concrete, verifiable proof that any of these sightings were actually the real Elvis. Some argue that the people who claim to have seen him simply misidentified someone who looked similar, or perhaps even unconsciously projected their desire to see Elvis onto another person. After all, Elvis was so ingrained in popular culture that many people might have imagined seeing him simply because they desperately wanted to believe he was still alive. The lack of physical evidence is perhaps the most significant argument for those who reject the theory. If Elvis were truly alive, why wouldn't he have shown himself by now? Over the years, the King's fans have clung to the idea of sightings, but none of these have been confirmed by independent sources, and many have been debunked as mere lookalikes or misunderstandings. Skeptics argue that someone as famous as Elvis would have a hard time staying out of the public eye indefinitely. Even if he managed to disappear for a time, wouldn't the curiosity of the media or even his own family eventually drag him out of hiding? The argument for an Elvis who has remained in hiding for decades seems implausible to many, particularly when weighed against the lack of definitive proof. Another aspect that skeptics emphasize is the medical evidence surrounding Elvis's death. The official cause of death was heart failure, likely exacerbated by years of prescription drug use and health problems. According to the reports from the time, Elvis had been battling obesity, exhaustion, and a range of health issues in the years leading up to his death. The idea that someone with such a frail state could have pulled off such an elaborate ruse seems unlikely to many experts. Skeptics argue that the physical toll on Elvis's body would have been too great for him to have been able to pull off a death hoax at such a young age, and that the circumstances surrounding his death were well documented by those closest to him. Skeptics also question the motivations behind such a grand deception. Why would Elvis, one of the most famous people in the world, go to such lengths to fake his death? Some believe that he simply reached a breaking point after years of grueling fame, but others argue that it's hard to imagine why someone would give up everything, his career, his fans, and his legacy, just to live a life of obscurity. The idea that someone as driven as Elvis would completely vanish without leaving any trace seems far-fetched to many. For those who reject the conspiracy theory, the absence of solid evidence and the implausibility of such a grand deception are enough to discredit the idea that Elvis Presley could have faked his own death. While the sightings and photographs continue to intrigue those who believe in the theory, skeptics remain firm in their stance, urging fans to accept the reality that the king of rock and roll is, in fact, gone. Despite the rational arguments against the theory, the mystery of Elvis's death continues to captivate and intrigue. Whether or not the king is still alive, one thing is certain: Elvis's legacy will continue to live on, fueling speculation, rumors, and the eternal hope that the king may one day return to his throne. So what do you think? Is Elvis Presley still alive, living in secret, or is his legend simply too powerful to fade? After all the sightings, rumors, and evidence, the mystery endures, leaving fans and skeptics alike questioning the truth. Whether you believe the theories or accept the official story, one thing is certain: Elvis's legacy is immortal. His music, his impact, and his mystery continue to captivate us all. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think Elvis is still out there? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all things Elvis and other legendary mysteries.